Soil. Excuse me. Apart from water, soil is the most important and essential material resource that we have on this planet. Now, it really is. Our lives are dependent on it. The food that we eat, 2 veg and 1 meat. The veg comes from the soil. And what do the cows and the sheep eat? They eat grass, which comes from the soil. The clothing that you're wearing, the cotton, the silk, the wool, it all comes from the soil. Okay, you wear acrylic, nylon, polyester. It comes from oil, which comes from ancient rainforests that grew in the soil. The petrol in your car, the rubber on your tyres, the pharmaceuticals, the makeup, the carpet, the cellulose in the paint, the fibres in the wallpaper. If we look back to things like metal, we would never have got out the Stone Age if we didn't burn wood, which melted the metal. And where does the wood come from? It comes from the soil. I love this stuff because I know how important it is and how essential it is. I also know how we easily take it all for granted. It's fantastic stuff. In fact, I will eat some of this later. It's actually marvellous stuff. It's magnificent. It's magical. I mean, really, soil is absolute magic. You may think it's a great magic trick to pull a rabbit out of a hat. By the way, the rabbit and the hat, they both come from the soil. But when it comes to magic, soil is in a league of its own. From this bucket of soil, what can we create from this? What does it make? A banana. Can you see any yellow in that? Where's the yellow come from? It doesn't taste like banana, and yet there's a banana in this. There's also an apple. That doesn't taste sweet. 19 of the 20 worst toxins and poisons on the planet all come from the soil. I've just eaten some of this, I'm not dead. Where's it come from? What's going on in this stuff? The plastic in this pen, this rubber ball, it bounces. This doesn't bounce, catch. It's just soil. The money that we spend, even the ink, comes from the soil. The DVDs you watch, the books you read, but I can't read that. But every book you've ever read has all come from the soil. And where's the bitterness of a lemon in this? It's all in there. So what in God's name is going on here? How is it this stuff that we shake off from our feet and we dig on our allotments day after day can create all this stuff, and yet it still looks like soil, smells like soil, and tastes like soil? Well, we're going to do a little experiment. We're going to find out what is soil. What is it? Well, any grower throughout the world will tell you, apart from volcanic ashes and hydroponics, there's 3 kinds of soil. There's sand, there's silt, and there's clay. Sand particles under the microscope are this big. Silt particles are sort of like that big. And clay particles are so tiny, I've dropped it, and I'll never find it again. They are tiny. So what we're going to do, we're going to put the sand and the silt and the clay in this bucket, stir it all up. Now we've got proper soil, and we're going to grow a single plant. This one, and we're going to plant it in this. There's nothing in there but clay, silt and sand. We put our plant in and we wait, and what happens? Dead. Doesn't grow. So it isn't the medium that's creating all this magic. I forgot. Bit of water. Forgot to water the thing. And a bit of air perhaps. And we put our plant in, and what happens? It dies. So it's not the water, it's not the air, it's not the medium. There's something else in this that's magical. What is it? It's a question. Does anybody know? What's missing? Now, we're not talking chemicals, fertilised and artificial stuff. We're talking a natural experiment here. What's missing from this bucket to make this plant grow?
Heat.
Heat?
Light.
I'm hot.
Light.
Light? We've got light.
Food.
Ah, food. Okay, well, we can't use the chemicals. We've already agreed on that. So what? Compost? Compost. Okay, so it's funny enough, I've got some compost in my pocket. So we're going to put compost in this now. Put our plant in, and there's still something missing. We've got the medium, we've got light, we've got heat, we've got water, we've got air, we've got organic material, and the plant still doesn't grow. What's missing from that? And we're all expert growers, and we don't know. And I didn't know for years. What's missing from this soil is life. And I just happen to have a few bugs here. I've been having this worm wriggling around in my mouth all night. And that's going in the bucket as well. Now what happens when we plant our plant? It grows. Now that simple, crazy, childlike model is what's been happening for 500 million years on this planet. That plants grow, they shed their leaves, their bark. In the canopy, the birds, they poo and they wee and they die. And all the dead material lands on the forest floor. And there's a whole army of critters, from your giant arthropods, which are your visible little insects, down to your nematodes, your protozoa and your bacteria, are all there to break all that material down into food that the plant can eat. We think that we feed our plants with chicken shit, horse manure, fish bud and bone. We can't. We don't. Plants can't eat manure. They can't eat compost. They can't. They're complex compounds. They can't eat it. They can only eat nitrogen, phosphate, potash, boron, magnesium, iron, and all the trace elements. They eat, wait for it, atoms. They eat atomic particles, which they take up through their xylem system, a beautiful canal network which goes from the root hairs right to the tip of the leaf. It takes up atoms and only atoms. And it's totally dependent on the life in the soil to break those complex compounds down into atoms. The best example of this, and there are hundreds of them, is that the worm cast, when they eat the leaves, it goes through their system, and there's about 18 different forms of bacteria inside the worm of a gut, all breaking different bits of that leaf down. And when they poo it out into their cast, even then it's not food for the plant. It needs another series of bacteria to eat that cast and to break it down into atoms. Now this example of how things grow, it all dies, goes onto the forest floor, it goes through the critter's guts, it gets broken down into complex compounds, simple compounds and atoms, and it's taken back up to the thing. This cycle of life has been going on long before we ever come here. And the best example of this is a rainforest, and the best rainforest is the Brazilian rainforest. Now, zoologists and biologists throughout the world would all agree, apart from a few crazy ones, that the Brazilian rainforest is the most biodiverse and rich, lush environment on the planet. It has more ferns than any other place. It has more birds, it has more orchids, it has more trees, more beetles, more insects, more mollusks, crustaceans, yet the list goes on. And the soil is so lush, it's so full of life. Should there be a little clink of light hitting the forest floor and you put a plant in it, it will flourish. Well, this did not escape a number of serious, very rich farmers, some of which came from America, that did deals with Brazilian landowners or officials to actually deforest large areas, get loads of money from the teak and the mahogany and all the rest of the woods, get rid of the stumps and plant their crops in it. And the first year they had a fantastic crop. Brilliant, made loads of money. And the second year, really good. Third year, great. Fourth year, not that good. And fifth year. And after 7 or 8 years, the crop yield dwindled rapidly. Until in the end, it wasn't worth planting anything in it. In the end, they just put grass in there and grazed cattle on it. What was missing from that? What had they taken away? They'd taken away the forest floor, the leaf litter, that magical membrane of life that sustains all life on earth, including you. You've all come from the forest floor. Probably 1,000 times over with your atoms in your body. This membrane of life has taken 500 million years to get all the little critters in the right place. And this is what happens when a seed falls from a tree in the rainforest. Now we're going subterranean, we're going into depth, so you can understand the plants you grow, what's going on your plots. The seed falls from the tree, along with the leaf litter and all the bark and all the dead bits and all the wee and all the poo and everything else. It falls into the leaf litter, it nuzzles its way down, for some reason it doesn't get eaten, and it goes below the leaf litter where critters can't eat it, and it sits there, just on top of the soil, just below the leaves, and it waits. It waits for the appropriate moment. Let's just say that this is a temperate forest and there's a risk of frost. It's kept nice and warm, it's kept slightly damp, and in the spring, the warmth hits the leaves, it penetrates through the leaves, and that little seed germinates. And the first thing it does, it sends its taproot out, down, because it has to get water. The next thing it does, it breaks the husk open, and the cotyledons or seedlings, the first solar panels come up. And then the next thing it does, even before the true leaf can fully start, it sends out its lateral roots. Just upon the surface, just below the leaf litter, where most of the atoms have been collected whilst it was waiting to germinate. Because that is the richest part of the soil. It isn't down there. It's just below the leaf litter. Now, if you plant what they call the cucurbits, the tomatoes, your squashes, melons, all the rest of it, you'll notice that they have, if you give them the chance, lateral roots, which spread out from, and they go out sideways. Trees send out lateral roots. The basic system is this. The tap roots go down for the water, and the laterals go out for the food. I've been a grower for many years. I've had many allotments. I've set up an organic research cooperative. I've ploughed the land. I've done micro drip systems. I've commercially grown hundreds of tons of crops. I'm familiar with the way things grow. But I've always been fascinated and confused as to why it is in the springtime everything is lush and green and fast growing and full of life. Why? It's because over the winter, when the plants were not taking nutrients from the soil, the leaf litter and all the dead stuff and all the dead bugs and all the rest of it has created this, just below the leaf litter, has created this beautiful, rich, thin layer of humus. Beautiful, rich stuff, the best food source you can possibly get, riddled with these essential atoms, and the plants can send their laterals out. Later on, use up the humus, they run out of food, they get eaten by bugs, they're not so strong, and they start getting a little bit dilapidated until in the autumn they look really sick indeed. But in the springtime, they're at their best. But what if you could keep that humus line going? What if you could keep topping it up? What would happen if you created a forest floor system on your plot, or indeed in a single bed, where you can keep this recycling system going? On the forest floor, the taproot goes down the laterals go out, start to feed in. And as the roots go down, more laterals come out. And what happens is the bacteria are actually, certain species of bacteria are attracted to the roots. And they start forming a symbiotic relationship with the roots. And the bacteria start to transfer nutrients that they have found into the plant. And then the plant takes those atoms, those nutrients as we call them, up to the top where they're photosynthesized. No, don't ask me how that works because it's just bonkers. No one knows how that works. But anyway, it turns these atoms into complex compounds again, into sugars and complex carbons and carbohydrates. And it sends it down through the phloem system. We think it all goes one way. It isn't. It's a two-way system. And the plant always creates more than it needs. And it sends its surplus down to the roots and it feeds the bacteria which is waiting for it. The trade-off is perfect. There are so many different kinds of protozoa and even some nematodes that actually defend the roots. They are there to defend anything that will attack it because the nematodes are being fed by the plant. But the best one is a certain group of fungus called mycorrhizal fungus. Now these send out mycelium. In this case it's called a hyphae, a very white fluffy stuff. It smells like mushrooms. You may have seen it in wood chips. And what happens here is you put your plant in and the plant sends out a signal. They don't exactly know how it is. They proved it in the lab. It's a chemical signal, we believe, and the hyphae pick it up and makes its way towards the plant. And the hyphae and the roots, the root hairs, just like Avatar, they bind up and they blend and they merge and they become one. Now the plant growing in this spot has got a root space this big. With the bacteria, its feeding area is this big. But once it's attached to a wide network of hyphae from the mycorrhizal fungus, it now has a feeding area the size of this room. Because the fungus transport waters from far around and all the trace elements that the plant needs. And it readily takes it up to the plant and says, "Yeah, Gov, got all this for you, there's a lot more, here it comes. And the plant readily takes it up to the top, photosynthesizes it, sends it down to sugar and carbon and hands it over to the fungus to say, "Thank you, mate, you're really helping me." But in the system that we've got today, where we dig the soil, we disrupt all this environment, we disrupt all the natural life in our soil. If we don't allow the lateral roots to develop because we hurry it like mad with this weapon of mass destruction, we create this fine tilth of soil on the top of the soil. And in the sunlight, it dries out. It bakes the roots. In the winter, it freezes. We provide one of the most hostile environments possible for that plant. And yet plants, big bless them, they want to live. And even though we make it really, really hard for them, they still give us our fruit. They still give us our food. They still do their job. They still manage. I've been working with Janet and Jella and Eddie and Thomas a little bit, and hopefully more later on, and a number of other people in this area here, teaching them, showing them how you can create a system on your plot. All you need to do is get a little piece of wood like that, this size here, make a little framework around it, deep tine it because it's been flattened by foot and all sorts of stuff. Don't dig it, deep tine it to make inroads, because why do you put air in the soil? It's not so the plants can breathe, it's so that the animals can breathe. They need oxygen. As long as you put oxygen in there and you put the green waste on the top, a layer of it, and leave it over winter, put a net over it to stop the birds and the shrews and all sorts of other critters and badgers or whatever getting at it and eating the worms, and leave it. And in the springtime, all you need to do is move over that mulch, the rainforest floor. You'll find a beautiful thin layer of humus, nutrient rich or atom rich. You get a knitting needle, because if it's your first year you might need to create more wormholes, and you spike the stalk down below and a few on the side. You get a bit of wet compost, spent compost, doesn't matter as long as it's soaking wet. You put it at the bottom of the hole. You do not tear the roots open. You just gently take it out of the pot. You rest it onto the wet soil. You get a bit more wet compost and you poke it round the side of it. You only need to touch it, get a bit of soil, take it over, and then put the mulch back and leave it. It will immediately start to grow. As soon as the root hairs hit that humus, they will immediately start feeding itself. But in the traditional system of tearing it out of its pot, breaking all the roots open, chucking it in this concrete soil hole, putting soil around it, and then putting your body weight on it and healing it in, it's crap. It's wrong. It's a living thing. As soon as the root hairs touch wet compost, it will start to grow. And if any of you have ever grown a bean in a bottle with blotting paper, you will know. As soon as the root hair hits that wet blotting paper, it will grow. I am quite happy to assist or help anyone who has a plot that's got a raised bed or wooden defined area, or wants to understand about compost and how best to use it, particularly if you've got a particular kind of crop that you love very much and you want to give it the best that it can. I've got time for you. I've got real time. It is my passion and it is my love, because I believe that a lot of the practices that we've got today with allotments throughout this country, throughout Europe, throughout the world, I believe that human beings are doing it wrong. I'm following the great work by the most eminent scientist, Dr. Elaine Ingham, who has pioneered the understanding of the soil and the life in it for the last 40 years. And I applaud the work of Charles Dowding, who's pioneering again the actual no-dig system that incorporates the use of not niche green waste, which is what I use, but he composts it first and puts it on. I'm going to sit down in a second, but a nod will do, a yes or a no. Has anyone learned anything tonight that helped them understand a little more about how plants grow? Do I see any nods? I get a few nods. Is there anyone here that maybe in some small way would change the way that they do things on their allotment? Do not rule out, and I will sit down in a second and I will eat this soil because it's delicious. If you have a compost bin, why are you taking all this beautiful gold dust green waste away from the soil into a separate tiny little spot where the rain can wash all the nutrients, all the atoms down into the water table and then take it all the way back to which you have to dig it in? Why can't you just find an area on your plot and just lay it out there and leave it? The soil won't freeze, it won't bake. And when the rain hits your freshly dug and raked soil, again and again and again, it compounds it and compacts it until it makes it solid. You put that layer of green waste over the top of it, and your plot or that area will be totally fit for planting. And believe me, and I will shut up now, your plants, you will be astonished at the growth. The speed of growth is phenomenal. I have grown 17 melons outdoors in a heat wave, cantaloupes, 15 of which were edible. That is a fact. I've grown a small privet hedge, one in traditional and one non-traditional. 3 times faster growth in privet, and I could go on. Thank you for putting up with me. And I did say I'd eat this stuff, and I am going to eat a whole spoonful of it. Lovely stuff. I'm going to wash it down with water though. Where's my water? No, don't worry, it's just cocoa powder and poppy seeds, which incidentally all comes from the soil. Thank you.